We can now bring in Subir Sinha, Director of SOAS's South Asia Institute and researcher in development studies. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today. What message is the Prime Minister sending with today's commemorations?
The Prime Minister is sending a message that this is the end of a constitutional democratic republic and the start of a Hindu majoritarian state.
So how should India's
Well,
Muslims and Christians feel today?
I think with India's Muslims in particular, with a very small minority, the humiliation and the process of making them into second-class citizens that formally started with the destruction of this mosque in 1992 has reached some kind of a conclusion. For Christians, I think they're not directly involved in this particular episode, but of course the degradation of their own equal rights of citizenship has been an ongoing story. And in fact, only yesterday we saw groups connected with the Hindutva political formation destroying and putting Hindu flags on churches in different parts of the country.
But what's confusing to me is, on one hand, you see the Prime Minister doing this and he's saying, our Lord Ram has arrived, assuming that everyone in the country is Hindu. But at the same time, he meets with church leaders for Christmas. So what's he trying to do? Why is the mixed messaging?
That is precisely the point, to keep things ambiguous. I don't think that even today it is a clear-cut situation that he could proclaim a Hindu republic. And also, since you talk about the return of Ram to this temple, obviously, Lord Ram is a much revered God figure all across the country. But in folk sayings, people say, "Kan kan mein vyape hai Ram," which means that Ram resides even in a grain of sand. So why this particular massive temple is required has to, in my view, less to do with Ram and much more to do with a Hindutva majoritarian political platform. And I find it actually quite ironic and interesting that despite having ruled for 10 years, having had such a complete control over institutions and over media, something of this magnitude was seen as required in order to gain a third term. Though, of course, this was a part of the core agenda with which the BJP came into power in 2014. So this allows him to say that he has ticked off 3 or 4 of the main points of that agenda.
I want to talk about the elections in a minute, but India still remains a secular country despite what may be happening. The constitution, I read, calls for justice, liberty, equality, fraternity. It sounds awfully similar to the French constitution because that's where India got its inspiration from. So secular values still exist. Doesn't that place Western leaders who value secular values in their own countries in a tricky position when they publicly embrace Narendra Modi? And I'm thinking of Emmanuel Macron, who's going to be meeting Modi in a couple of days' time.
I'm sorry to say Mr. Macron has been a big disappointment in this regard, as has Joseph Biden and as have the Germans, obviously Meloni, Rishi Sunak. One really questions the commitment of all of these countries to their own values of secularism, given how much they have allowed for this to happen. I don't mean to suggest that foreign countries should interfere in India's internal affairs, but to have all of this happen while at the same time continuing to profess, values of secularism makes no sense to me. So I think it is a bad moment for secularism around the world, including in the countries I've just named. The attack on secularism in India is not something new, though it is a culmination of a much longer process. And we should never fool ourselves into thinking that India was ever a properly secular country. If you speak to people who are Muslims particularly, the idea of being an equal citizen to Hindus, I don't think is something that they would subscribe to. They might say things were better before in the 1980s and 1990s, but that things have become much worse now. But now, as we know, secularism was directly an object of attack of the movement to destroy the Babri Masjid and to construct this temple. And in fact, secularism was often referred to as pseudo-secularism, both by Mr. Modi and his predecessor at the head of the party, Mr. L.K. Advani.
I want to ask you about the opposition, because the opposition boycotted today's events. Won't that hurt them when we look at the elections in a couple of months' time?
It may hurt them. It most likely will in some key states such as Uttar Pradesh and also in states like Gujarat. I think the clever thing, or let us say cynical thing that has happened now is that Mr. Modi is saying that Hindutva equals Hinduism. and also that beyond the core support that he has of people who habitually vote for the BJP, this might actually also muddy the waters on things like economic issues, joblessness, price rise, and things like that. So he's looking for a larger constituency than what normally votes for him. We have a strong north-south division in terms of electoral preferences in the country. None of the South Indian states are ruled by the BJP. It is doubtful whether states like Bihar and so forth would also follow Uttar Pradesh or some of the BJP ruled states into giving him the numbers that he had in the last elections. After all, they are at 303 seats. The majority in parliament is just over 270. So he wants to make sure that what he could not achieve through his economic development policies or his social policies or letting loose large-scale violence via vigilante groups around the country can be compensated for via this temple through which he wants to, broaden out his base.
Which costs some $200 million, I believe. Thank you very much, Subir Sinha, for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.